What's up guys, my name's Brandon, and there are a lot of people out there who can't afford to buy the latest and greatest iPhones each year, and honestly, it doesn't even make sense for the majority of people to do so, even if they could afford it. So I think that's why more and more people are looking at older phones to buy these days, a lot more than in the past. So I went out and used 3 older, smaller iPhones here in 2020, and I wanted to tell you guys how they held up for me and which ones you should actually buy. So in this video, we're gonna be comparing the iPhone 6s, the iPhone 7, and the iPhone 8. So we're gonna be comparing the build quality, the cameras, the performance, battery life, how well they've held up over the years, and of course, the price to make sure that you don't buy the wrong one of these devices. All right, so let's go ahead and kick things off with the build quality. So the iPhone 6s is obviously the oldest of the bunch, being released back in 2015, and the build quality does reflect that, but mostly in areas that you cannot physically see. Now there are 2 main differences that you can physically see on the back here, and the first one, the most obvious one, are the antenna bands on the iPhone 6s, which look really ugly and very outdated. So you are going to have those visible antenna bands, and of course the back camera, the rear-facing camera, looks a lot smaller on the 6s compared to the 7. Both the 6s and the 7 also both have Gorilla Glass screens, an aluminum back right here, and also an aluminum frame. However, the big difference, like I mentioned earlier, that you cannot see is the water resistance. So the iPhone 7 is going to be IP67 rated for water and dust resistance, whereas the 6s has no IP rating. So that's a big deal if you take your phone outside of your house pretty much at all. Not to have any type of waterproofing or any type of water resistance even. So that is a big difference between the 6s and the 7 and the 8. Now if you take a look at the front, you can see there's hardly any difference between these phones. It's going to be really hard to differentiate between the 6, 7, and 8 if you're just looking at the front side, because they all have that same chin and the bezels right here. They all have the chrome ring around the home button. They all have the front-facing camera right here, and they all have the same 4.7-inch LCD display. You will also notice that the 6s has a headphone jack, whereas the 7 or the 8 do not. 2016, of course, was the first year that Apple eliminated the headphone jack with the iPhone 7 and the 7 Plus, and it was a big controversy back then, but it's not really that big of a deal here in 2020. I personally have not used the headphone jack at all. Even here in 2020, when I went to use this again, I really had no use for the headphone jack in any scenario in my day-to-day life. But if you are somebody who uses like studio headphones or just anything that uses a 3.5mm headphone jack, just know that the 6s is going to be the only one out of these 3 that has that headphone jack. Now, when it comes to the iPhone 8, you will see that there is a major design change on the back side. Of course, the iPhone 8 has a glass back with an aluminum frame, which means that it will not only look a lot more high-end and feel a lot more high-end, but it's also going to allow you to wirelessly charge, which is something that means a lot more here in 2020 than it did back when it was released in 2017. I found myself constantly using wireless charging here in 2020, whereas I vividly remember when I used this as my daily driver back in 2017, I hardly ever used wireless charging, so I didn't really push that as a big pro of the 8 compared to the 7 and the 6s and the SE. But nowadays here in 2020, wireless charging is very, very big and a big advantage over the 7 and the 6s. We also have a much cleaner backside with no text under iPhone and a much better camera looking setup than the iPhone 7. The only downside to the 8 is that it will scratch and shatter easier due to that glass backing. So you should definitely either be more careful with it or just rock a case if you're using any phone really with a glass backing. Now, since we're back here, we may as well discuss another important topic, and that is the camera. So on the iPhone 6s, we have a 12 megapixel f2.2 lens with dual LED flash and HDR, and we can also shoot 4K video at 30 FPS. Now on the iPhone 7, we have a 12 megapixel f1.8 lens with quad LED flash, HDR, and for the first time, OIS, which is optic image stabilization. Now you can still only shoot in 4K 30, but still, OIS is a huge noticeable advantage in the video department over the iPhone 6s. Now the iPhone 7 Plus was also the first iPhone to introduce a dual camera setup, so that additional telephoto lens on the 7 Plus and on the 8 Plus as well will give you the ability to take portrait photos and zoom in without having to sacrifice clarity. So that is also something to note if you are looking for the plus size models. Now, if you missed it, I did also make a video on the iPhone 7 Plus specifically. So if you want to watch that, that will be linked up in the cards. And then on the iPhone 8, we have the exact same camera setup as the iPhone 7, but just with the added ability to shoot 4K 60 video. And through the years, of using all these phones as my daily driver and taking tons of pictures and tons of video, I can tell you that the picture quality and the video quality of the 7 is far better than it is of the 6S. And obviously the 8 is going to be the same as the 7, except for the 8 does take better video because we do have that 4K 60 capability. Now, when it comes to the selfie camera, we have a 5 megapixel camera on the 6S versus a 7 megapixel lens on both the 7 and the iPhone 8. Now, the difference in quality is not going to be near as noticeable as it is on the back camera, the rear facing camera, but if you look hard, you can definitely see skin tones and noise reduction are a lot better on both the 7 and the 8. So if camera quality matters a lot to you, especially when it comes to video, you should go ahead and just eliminate the 6S from this list of potential phones to buy, since the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 8 are just far superior in that camera category. So taking a look at the displays here, like I mentioned, all three have the same size display at 4.7 inches, the same resolution at 750 by 1334, and the exact same pixel density at 326 ppi. However, there is a big difference between the iPhone 6S and the iPhone 7 and the 8, and that is that both the 7 and the 8 have Apple's Retina display, which means that the overall quality and the overall colors are going to be greatly improved. We also saw the wide color gamut introduced with the iPhone 7, which means that we are going to have more realistic color reproduction than we did on the iPhone 6S. We also have a slightly dimmer screen on the 6S with a max brightness of 550 nits compared to 625 on both the 7 and the 8. And given that I've been using like newer smartphones in 2019 and 2020, this is one of the more noticeable differences to me overall. The 6S just doesn't have great viewing angles, and it's noticeably less visible in direct sunlight compared to the 7 and the 8. So you're probably wondering, is the actual quality of the screen that big of a difference in real life, like day-to-day usage? And I say, yeah, there's a noticeable difference. I wouldn't really call it big, I guess, but when watching Netflix or YouTube videos, the 7 and the 8 both look pretty much identical, but the 6S just doesn't get it done for me here in 2020. I just don't like the quality of the screen and the dull colors. It's not really dull, but compared to these two and compared to like modern smartphones, the colors are just pretty dull and the viewing angles are kind of lackluster. It's also worth mentioning that the iPhone 7 introduced stereo sound, which makes audio sound so much more clear when watching videos, because of course we have 2 speakers now instead of just 1 like we do on the 6S. So now let's talk about the performance, and this is another important difference between these 3 phones, and really any phone that you're looking to purchase, you should know about its performance. So the iPhone 6S has Apple's A9 chip, the 7 has Apple's A10 Fusion chip, and the iPhone 8 has the A11 Bionic chip. Now, all 3 phones have 2 gigabytes of RAM, but that different chipset will make a difference in how well the phone handles memory and really just any other performance-oriented tasks. It's also worth noting that the iPhone 7 Plus and the iPhone 8 Plus both have 3 gigabytes of RAM, so they will perform better in nearly every category over the normal-sized iPhone 7 and iPhone 8. So again, if you are looking at the plus-size models, that is something to take into consideration. So actually using all 3 of these phones here in 2020, I was actually surprised to find that the iPhone 7 would sometimes outperform the iPhone 8 in day-to-day tasks. I did everything that I normally do on my phones on all 3 of these phones. I used them each for 1 day consecutively, and I texted, I made phone calls, I hooked it up to CarPlay, I did all my social media stuff, I recorded videos, all that stuff. And obviously the iPhone 6S was the least fast and the least responsive and the worst when it came to RAM management, obviously, between these 3. But I was surprised that the iPhone 7 would sometimes outperform the iPhone 8 consistently in different areas. But when it comes to gaming, this was another area where I was pretty surprised, because all 3 perform pretty much the same. Even the iPhone 6S performs pretty much just as good as the iPhone 8 when it comes to games. Even when I was playing things like Call of Duty Mobile, they all 3 played very well. Now, obviously the graphics are not near as good on the 6S as they are on the 7 or the 8, but I didn't really have any stutter or any lag at all in COD Mobile on the iPhone 6S, which really surprised me because I thought it would. But when it comes to more intensive games like Fortnite, this is an area where I did see lag on the iPhone 6S and the iPhone 7, but the iPhone 8 handled Fortnite a lot better than any of these other devices. Now, for some reason, CarPlay was also a lot slower to connect and just to function on the iPhone 6S compared to the 7 or the 8, and really I was just surprised to see kind of lag, especially when I'd make a phone call from my phone. It would be like a little 3 or 4 second delay before it actually called the person when I was using the 6S, whereas I did not have that on the 7 or the 8. Now, when it came to LTE and Wi-Fi connectivity, I surprisingly did not notice any major difference between the three. If anything, the iPhone 6s held its own and did not drop signal one time, whereas my iPhone 8 actually did drop signal, and it was while I was on a phone call and it made that phone call fail. So that was pretty disappointing and really told me a lot as far as the 6S and how well it holds up even here in 2020. But with Bluetooth, the 7 and the 8 have Bluetooth 5.0, whereas the iPhone 6S has Bluetooth 4.2. So that was pretty annoying here in 2020 when I have so many devices to connect to via Bluetooth. That is definitely something worth noting. Now, as for the life expectancy in terms of software support, I would expect all three of these devices to get iOS 14 later this year, but the iPhone 6S likely will not be getting iOS 15 next year. So that means you're going to be buying a phone that will only last 1 year compared to the 7 and the 8, which should last a bare minimum of 2 to 3 more years. All right, so now let's discuss the battery life of these guys. So the iPhone 6S has a 1715 milliamp hour battery, the iPhone 7 has a 1960 milliamp hour battery, and the iPhone 8 has an 1821 milliamp hour battery. So yes, you heard that right. The iPhone 8 does have a smaller battery than the iPhone 7. Now, throwing the specs aside, actually using these guys for a day each here in 2020, I was surprised by my results. So all three still have the original battery intact. They have not been replaced or anything like that. And you can see the battery health of all three here. We have the iPhone 6S at an 89%, the iPhone 7 at 99%, and the iPhone 8 at 100%. So of course, with the iPhone 6S having a lower battery health, I was expecting a lot lower battery life, and that's what I got. I found it to not even last half the day before needing to charge when I got to around 10%. Meanwhile, both the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 8 were pretty much the same in my testing, lasting me around half of the day, maybe a little bit longer than half the day. But clearly the battery life isn't going to be near what you get on something like the iPhone XR, which came out the year after the 8 in 2018. But with these three, you're going to get better battery life on the 7 and the 8, but the difference in the two is not very noticeable. But of course, the difference between these two compared to the 6S is definitely noticeable, probably even regardless of your maximum battery capacity here. Now, of course, you will get better battery life from the plus size models of the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 8, but you will also be paying more for those models. And speaking of paying more, let's go ahead and discuss the price of these phones in 2020 and which one you should buy to get the most bang for your buck. So of these three, the only one currently being sold by Apple is the iPhone 8, and it's priced at $449 for a 64 gigabyte model and $499 for a 128 gigabyte model. And let me just tell you right now, you are being absolutely ripped off if you pay that price for an iPhone 8 in 2020, especially with the iPhone 9 or the iPhone SE2, whatever it's going to be called, potentially coming out soon. Do not even consider buying a new iPhone 8 in 2020. Just don't. What you need to do is buy used. So on eBay, you can find the iPhone 8 for around $200 to $300, and a lot of the time, they're going to be going for even less than that. So if you use my guide on how to buy used iPhones on eBay, I will have that linked up in the cards and down in the description below. You will know what to look for in these listings, but $200 to $300 is a lot more reasonable for a good condition iPhone 8 in 2020 than spending like $500. Now, as for the iPhone 7, these are going for around $100 to $150. That is almost half the price that the iPhone 8s are going for. And like I said, sometimes it even performs better than the iPhone 8. So you can already see the great value there. But with the 6S, we have a 64 gigabyte model that I'm going to be looking at here on eBay because you do not want 16 or 32 gigabytes in 2020, trust me. But if you look at the 6S on eBay, it's going for right around $100. So given those prices, the iPhone 7 is far and away the best value iPhone of these three to buy here in 2020, and it's really not even close. There are very minimal differences between the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 8. Really, the only main thing is going to be the build quality with that glass back, and that's going to lead to, wireless charging capabilities and things like that. But aside from that, there's really nothing else different between the 7 and the 8. So with such minimal differences, it should be an easy decision to go for the iPhone 7 or 7 Plus over the 6S, 6S Plus, or the iPhone 8 or 8 Plus. Now, even though the iPhone 9 or the iPhone SE2 is coming out very soon, it's going to cost $400, and that's going to be double the price that you would pay for a used iPhone 7 or even an iPhone 8. So I would not recommend that, but if you do want to save up and wait for that, of course, the iPhone 9 will last a lot longer than any of these devices, and it's probably going to be faster, better camera. It's just going to be the best device overall over any of these three phones. But of course, it is going to be double the price. But yeah, guys, that's my take on the iPhone 6s, the iPhone 7, and the iPhone 8 here in 2020. I did actually enjoy using these guys here in 2020. It was nice to change the pace a little bit, you know, from my iPhone 11 Pro Max to go to a device with a home button and, you know, bezels and a lot smaller form factor. It was really fun to do. I hope you guys do enjoy comparisons like this. If you want to see more comparisons of older phones in 2020 or, you know, anytime in the future, let me know down in a comment below. And also, if you guys enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you left a thumbs up on this video. So anyways, guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.